At 21, she lost absolutely everything. Betrayed, broke, and the laughingstock of the tech world, she spent her final $4,000 on a worthless, flooded rock quarry. But when a historic drought drained the black water, what pierced the surface didn't just clear her debt. It threatened her life. Naomi Kensington was supposed to be a prodigy. At 19, she had dropped out of college to launch a logistics algorithm that revolutionized how overnight freight was routed across the American Midwest. By 20, her startup was valued at $40 million. By 21, she was completely, devastatingly bankrupt. Her downfall wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated execution. Her older, much more experienced business partner, Richard Gable, had seen an opportunity. Richard was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who built his career on exploiting the blind spots of brilliant, naive founders. Through a labyrinth of aggressive, leveraged buyouts, hidden debt clauses, and a board of directors loyal only to him, Richard forced Naomi out of her own company. When the dust settled, she wasn't just unemployed. She was legally liable for millions in fabricated corporate debts. The ensuing court battles drained her savings, her inheritance, and her spirit. When the gavel finally fell in a New York courtroom, Naomi was left with a suitcase of clothes, a 2009 Honda Civic, and exactly $4,612 in her checking account. She drove north, away from the city, away from the headlines that mocked her as a flash-in-the-pan failure. She ended up in the fading industrial outskirts of Albany, sleeping in a damp motel room where the neon vacancy sign buzzed relentlessly through the night. She was entirely untethered, a ghost haunting her own life. One rainy Tuesday morning, desperate to escape the suffocating walls of her motel, Naomi wandered into a county administration building. Down the hall, a tax foreclosure auction was taking place. The room smelled of wet wool and cheap coffee. Farmers, local real estate speculators, and bored retirees sat in folding chairs, bidding on repossessed farmland and abandoned suburban lots. Naomi sat in the back row, letting the auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence wash over her like white noise. Next up, Lot 44, Oakhaven Quarry, 12 acres in Miller's Hollow, completely flooded. Unusable for agriculture, no residential zoning. Opening bid is $4,000. The room went dead silent. A few of the older men chuckled. Oakhaven Quarry was a local joke. It had been an active limestone mine in the 1920s, but they had dug too deep, piercing an underground aquifer. The quarry had flooded in a matter of days, taking heavy machinery and a supposedly haunted history down into the freezing black depths. Since then, it had been a liability, a fenced-off death trap that had claimed the lives of a few reckless teenagers over the decades. No one wanted it. Do I hear 4,000? Anyone? 4,000 for 12 acres? The auctioneer droned, preparing to pass on the lot. Naomi didn't think. She didn't analyze the ROI. She didn't check the zoning laws. And she certainly didn't listen to the voice in her head screaming that she needed that money for food and shelter. She just raised her hand. 4,000, she croaked. Heads turned. Richard Gable had taken everything intangible from her patents, her code, her reputation, her future. She desperately, irrationally wanted to own something physical, something nobody else wanted, something that couldn't be hacked, stolen, or leveraged away. Sold to the young lady in the back for $4,000. After the taxes and administrative fees, she walked out of the building with a deed to a giant puddle of black water, leaving exactly $15 to her name. When she drove out to Miller's Hollow to see her new kingdom, the reality of her stupidity hit her like a physical blow. The property was a nightmare. A rusted chain-link fence, choked with dead ivy, surrounded a massive, gaping crater in the earth. The water was pitch black, perfectly still, and deeply unsettling. Dead trees clawed their way out of the steep, rocky banks. The wind howled through the hollow, sounding like a dying animal. She parked her car, walked to the edge of the precipice, and sat in the dirt, crying until her ribs ached. "You're the fool who bought the devil's bathtub, huh?" Naomi jumped, scrambling to her feet. Standing a few yards away was an older man in a faded flannel shirt and muddy boots. He had a weathered face that looked like cracked leather. "I'm Henry Calloway," he said, spitting a dark stream of tobacco juice onto the gravel. "I own the cattle farm just up the ridge. Saw your car. Figured I'd come and see what kind of idiot buys Oakhaven." "Nice to meet you too, Henry," Naomi said, wiping her eyes defensively. "I'm Naomi, and yes, I'm the idiot." Henry walked to the edge, looking down at the dark water. "People around here say this place is cursed. The original owner, a rich industrialist named Arthur Montgomery, went crazy back in 1929. The stock market crashed, he lost his shirt, and then he just vanished. Rumor was, he jumped right into this quarry. Never found his body, just left behind a whole lot of water and bad memories. You better put up some better fencing, girl. If some local kid sneaks in and drowns, the county will sue you for everything you've got." "They can't," Naomi muttered bitterly. "I don't have anything left to take." 6 months passed. Naomi didn't leave Miller's Hollow. With no money for rent, she pitched a heavy-duty canvas tent on the flat ridge overlooking the quarry, surviving by working night shifts at a local diner. The locals treated her with a mix of pity and amusement. She was the quarry girl, the fallen tech prodigy living like a hermit on a cursed piece of land. But then, the summer of 2026 arrived, bringing with it the most brutal, unforgiving drought upstate New York had seen in over a century. For 12 weeks, not a single drop of rain fell. The local creeks dried up into cracked mud. Henry Calloway had to sell off half his herd because he couldn't water them. And at Oakhaven Quarry, the black water began to recede. It didn't happen all at once, but inch by inch, the aquifer beneath the quarry was drained by the panicked, over-pumping agricultural farms miles away. By mid-August, the water level in the quarry had dropped by a staggering 30 feet. The steep limestone walls, bleached white by the relentless sun, were exposed to the air for the first time in 90 years. One sweltering Tuesday morning, Naomi was sitting on the hood of her Civic, drinking cheap instant coffee, when she noticed a strange shape breaking the surface of the remaining water in the dead center of the quarry. It wasn't the rusted cab of an old excavator. It wasn't a jagged rock formation. It was a perfect right-angled corner of poured concrete. Naomi grabbed her binoculars from the dashboard and focused on the shape. Her breath caught in her throat. As the water rippled around it, she could clearly see rebar and a flat, smooth surface. It looked like the roof of a building, but that made absolutely no sense. Oakhaven was a surface mine, not a town. There were never any structures built at the bottom of the pit. For a week, she watched obsessively as the water continued to drop, revealing more of the structure. It was a square, bunker-like building, entirely encased in reinforced concrete. She needed to know what it was, but she couldn't dive in herself. The water was highly toxic, filled with decades of chemical runoff and stagnant bacteria. She needed a professional. Naomi took her last $200 of diner tips and drove to a salvage yard near the Hudson River. There, she found Adrian Brody. Adrian was a former Navy diver who had been medically discharged after blowing his eardrums in a training accident. He now made a meager living pulling submerged cars and sunken fishing boats out of the local rivers. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, and deeply skeptical. "You want me to dive into Oakhaven?" Adrian asked, wiping axle grease off his hands with a dirty rag. "Are you insane? That water is toxic soup. Plus, there's nothing down there but old tires and snapping turtles." "There's a building," Naomi insisted, slamming a grainy printed photograph onto his workbench. "Look at this. The water level dropped. That is poured concrete. If there's scrap metal in there, or old mining equipment, we can pull it up and split the profits 50-50. I just need to know what it is." Adrian stared at the photo for a long time. His eyes narrowed. "That's not a mining shack. The walls are too thick." He sighed, tossing the rag aside. "Fine, but I'm bringing the heavy-duty hazmat suit, and if I see so much as a crack in my airline, I'm surfacing, and you're still paying me." The next morning, Adrian backed his heavy-duty pickup truck to the edge of the quarry. He set up a portable winch system and a heavy umbilical dive line equipped with a two-way radio and a live feed helmet camera. Naomi sat at the monitoring station in the back of his truck, her hands trembling as she watched the grainy, green-tinted screen. Adrian waded into the thick, foul-smelling water. "Visibility is garbage," his voice crackled over the radio. "Maybe 3 feet. Descending now." Naomi watched the monitor as Adrian swam deeper into the gloom. The temperature of the water plummeted, and the light from his helmet lamp cut through swirling clouds of silt. "Okay, I'm approaching the roof of your structure," Adrian reported, his breathing echoing heavily through the comms. "Dropping down the side. This is weird, Naomi. The walls are smooth, high-grade concrete. This wasn't built for a mine. This was built to withstand a bomb." "Can you see an entrance?" Naomi asked, leaning closer to the monitor. "Moving around to the south face. Hang on." The camera violently shook as Adrian bumped into something. He cleared the silt away with his gloved hand. On the screen, a massive, rusted circular shape emerged from the gloom. Naomi gasped. "Is that—" "It's a door," Adrian said, his voice laced with shock. "Naomi, this isn't a bunker, it's a bank vault, a massive one, like the kind you'd see at a Federal Reserve branch. What the hell is a bank vault doing at the bottom of a flooded quarry?" "Can you open it?" Naomi demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Are you kidding me? It's solid steel, locked tight and rusted over. But wait. There's something wedged in the silt near the locking wheel. Looks like a strong box. I'm gonna grab it and head up. My air pressure is fine. But this place gives me the creeps." 10 minutes later, Adrian broke the surface of the water, dragging a small, heavy metal box covered in slime and barnacles. He trudged up the rocky bank and dropped it at Naomi's feet, breathing heavily as he pulled off his helmet. "Whatever is in there," Adrian panted, "it better be worth risking my neck for." Naomi grabbed a heavy wrench from the truck bed and smashed the rusted lock on the strongbox. It snapped with a brittle crunch. She pried the lid open. Inside, remarkably preserved in a layer of watertight wax, was a leather-bound ledger and a heavy, tarnished silver key. She opened the ledger. The ink was faded, but legible. It was filled with names, dates, and account numbers dating back to 1928. But these weren't ordinary bank transactions. They were lists of illicit transfers, land deeds, and blackmail material belonging to some of the most powerful political families in New York State history. The name at the top of the very first page made her blood run cold. Arthur Montgomery. "Adrian," Naomi whispered, tracing the names. "This vault, It wasn't flooded by accident. Montgomery flooded the quarry on purpose. He hid something down here. Yeah? Well, somebody else knows about it, Adrian said quietly. Naomi looked up. Adrian was pointing toward the high ridge on the opposite side of the quarry. There, parked silently among the dead trees, was a sleek, pitch-black SUV. The windows were heavily tinted. As soon as Naomi made eye contact with the vehicle, its engine roared to life, and it reversed quickly out of sight, disappearing into the dust. Naomi clutched the ledger to her chest. She had bought the quarry to escape her past, but as she stared at the dark water, she realized she had just inherited someone else's nightmare. The dust from the departing SUV had barely settled before Naomi packed up the dive station, her hands moving with frantic precision. The isolation of Miller's Hollow, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. She and Adrian retreated to her canvas tent on the ridge, zipping the heavy flaps shut against the cooling evening air. By the pale beam of a battery-powered camping lantern, they spread the wax-covered ledger across a folding table. As Naomi carefully turned the brittle, yellowed pages, the true scope of Arthur Montgomery's secrets revealed itself. The ledger wasn't just a record of blackmail. It was a comprehensive accounting of the shadow economy that thrived in New York during the Roaring Twenties and the immediate aftermath of the 1929 stock market crash. There were detailed logs of bribed judges, extortion payments to union bosses, and smuggled Canadian liquor routes. But it was a specific entry on page 42 that made Naomi's breath hitch. October 29th, 1929. Transfer of extorted pension funds. Recipient, Charles W. Gable. Naomi stared at the name, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What is it?" Adrian asked, leaning over her shoulder. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Not a ghost," Naomi whispered, tracing the elegant cursive script. "A grandfather. Charles Gable is the grandfather of Richard Gable, the man who stole my company and bankrupted me. Richard's entire family fortune, the wealth he used to leverage me out of my own board, was built on stolen union pensions. Arthur Montgomery orchestrated the theft, and Charles Gable laundered the money. It all suddenly made terrifying sense. The rumor was that Montgomery had gone mad and drowned himself. But the ledger suggested a different story. Montgomery had systematically hidden the physical evidence of his co-conspirators' crimes, likely to use as an insurance policy. When the heat came down, someone, perhaps Charles Gable himself, made sure Montgomery disappeared. The quarry wasn't a suicide spot. It was a watery grave for both a man and his leverage. A heavy crunch of gravel interrupted her thoughts. Headlights cut through the thin fabric of the tent. Outside, car doors slammed. Not one vehicle, but 3. "Stay behind me," Adrian muttered, grabbing a heavy steel wrench from his toolbox as he unzipped the tent flap. Naomi stepped out into the humid night air, standing shoulder to shoulder with the towering former Navy diver. 3 black SUVs formed a semicircle around her campsite, their high beams blindingly bright. 4 men in dark, tactical clothing stood near the vehicles, but the man who stepped forward was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit. He had silver hair, sharp features, and the cold, unblinking eyes of a corporate fixer. "Miss Kensington," the man said, his voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. "My name is Dominic Gallagher. I represent a consortium of private heritage investors. We have been monitoring the environmental changes in this county with great interest." "You were the one watching us from the ridge?" Naomi said, squinting against the glare. "Let's skip the posturing," Gallagher replied, stepping closer, his eyes darting to the heavy metal strongbox resting inside the open tent flap. "You have uncovered a structural anomaly on this property. Furthermore, you seem to have retrieved a historical artifact belonging to my employer's family. We are prepared to offer you $2 million for the deed to Oakhaven Quarry, effective immediately. Sign the digital transfer, hand over the box, and you can leave this miserable dirt pit a millionaire. $2 million. 6 months ago, Naomi would have killed for that kind of money. It would clear her fabricated debts and give her a fresh start. But looking at Gallagher, she realized something crucial. If they were offering $2 million up front, in the middle of the night, the contents of that submerged vault were worth hundreds of millions. Furthermore, this proved Richard Gable knew exactly what was down there, and he was terrified. "The property isn't for sale," Naomi said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And the ledger belongs to me. It's on my land." Gallagher sighed, a sound of genuine irritation. "Miss Kensington, you are a disgraced 21-year-old college dropout living in a tent. Do not mistake my offer for a negotiation. By tomorrow morning, I will have a county judge declare this site a hazardous emergency zone. The sheriff will drag you off this land in handcuffs, and we will extract the vault's contents legally. Take the money." Before Naomi could answer, the unmistakable clack-clack of a pump-action shotgun echoed through the hollow. From the shadows of the tree line, Henry Calloway emerged. The old farmer had his weapon leveled directly at Gallagher's chest, a wad of tobacco tucked firmly in his cheek. "You boys must be lost," Henry growled, spitting a dark stream onto the toe of Gallagher's expensive leather shoes. "This here is private property, and the county judge you're talking about? That's my brother-in-law, and he hates city boys in cheap suits. Now get off her land before I start treating you like coyotes." Gallagher's jaw tightened. He looked at Henry, then at the wrench in Adrian's hand, and finally at Naomi. He raised his hands in a slow mock surrender. "Tomorrow morning, Miss Kensington. Enjoy your last night of property ownership." The SUVs reversed in unison and sped away down the gravel access road. Naomi collapsed into a camp chair, her knees giving out. Henry lowered the shotgun, shaking his head. "I told you this place was cursed, girl." "It's not cursed, Henry," Naomi said, a fierce, burning resolve suddenly igniting in her chest. She looked up at Adrian. "It's leverage, but we don't have until tomorrow morning. The drought broke up north today. The weather radar shows a massive storm front moving in by 3 a.m. The aquifer is going to recharge and the water level will rise. We have to open that vault tonight." Midnight. The wind was howling through Miller's Hollow, carrying the scent of impending rain. Naomi, Adrian, and Henry stood at the edge of the quarry. Adrian had spent the last 2 hours rigging a pair of high-capacity industrial sludge pumps, powered by a roaring diesel generator. Thick hoses snaked down the steep limestone walls, aggressively sucking the remaining water away from the concrete bunker and discharging it into a dry ravine behind Henry's property. Inch by inch, the mud surrounding the massive steel vault door was sucked away. "That's as clear as it's going to get!" Adrian yelled over the roar of the generator. "Let's go!" Naomi and Adrian slid down the rocky embankment, boots sinking into the foul-smelling ankle-deep muck. Up close, the vault was a marvel of 1920s engineering. The circular steel door was easily 10 feet in diameter, covered in decades of rust and calcification, but structurally intact. In the center was a massive locking wheel and a single, heavy keyhole. Naomi pulled the tarnished silver key from her pocket. Her hands were shaking. She inserted the key into the slot. It didn't turn. "It's seized up!" Naomi shouted, frustration bringing tears to her eyes. Decades of rust. It's fueled shut. Step back, Adrian commanded. He grabbed a can of industrial penetrating solvent from his tool belt, emptying half the can into the keyhole and the surrounding locking pins. Then he took a heavy steel mallet and began striking the vault door in a rhythmic, circular pattern. Clang, clang, clang. "Shockwaves," he explained, panting. "Breaks up the internal rust." After 3 minutes of relentless hammering, Adrian nodded to her. Naomi gripped the key with both hands and twisted. With a harsh, grating shriek that echoed off the quarry walls, the internal tumblers disengaged. But the door still wouldn't budge. It weighed tons, and the vacuum seal of the mud held it fast. "The winch!" Adrian yelled up to Henry, who was operating the controls on the back of the pickup truck. Adrian quickly attached heavy steel cables to the handles of the locking wheel. He gave Henry a thumbs up. The truck's winch engaged with a high-pitched whine. The cable pulled taut, vibrating like a guitar string. For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The truck's suspension groaned. And then, with a wet, sucking pop that sounded like the earth itself tearing open, the massive steel door swung outward. A rush of stale, perfectly preserved air blew past them. Naomi clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight and stepped into the darkness. The interior of the vault was completely dry, perfectly sealed against the water that had encased it for 90 years. The beam of her flashlight swept across the room and stopped. Naomi gasped, dropping to her knees. Adrian walked in behind her and let out a low, disbelieving whistle. Stacked along the back wall, floor to ceiling, were wooden crates that had begun to rot under their own weight. Spilling out of them, gleaming dull and yellow in the flashlight beam, were hundreds of solid gold bullion bars, each stamped with the seal of the United States Treasury. But Naomi's eyes weren't on the gold. They were focused on the left wall, which was lined with hundreds of steel safe deposit boxes. She walked over, using Adrian's crowbar to pry open a box labeled with the initials CWG. Inside were stacks of original stock certificates, property deeds for half of Manhattan's commercial real estate, and a signed, notarized confession from Charles Gable detailing the extortion network. It was the smoking gun. It was the exact documentation that could completely dismantle Richard Gable's legacy, trigger a federal investigation, and freeze every asset his company held. "Naomi," Henry's voice echoed down from the ridge. "We got company." A crack of thunder split the sky, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Naomi scrambled out of the vault. At the top of the ridge, a convoy of 5 black vehicles had smashed through the chain-link gate. A dozen armed men, led by Dominic Gallagher, poured out into the rain. "Get away from the door!" Gallagher roared through a megaphone. Naomi didn't run. She didn't hide. She calmly walked up the slippery embankment, the steel safe deposit box tucked under one arm, the ledger in the other. She stopped 10 feet from Gallagher, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "Take it all," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the storm. Gallagher lowered the megaphone, a triumphant smirk crossing his face. "A wise decision, Ms. Kensington." "Take the gold," Naomi continued, her tone turning ice cold. "Take the vault, take the dirt. But before you shoot me, or try to bury me in this pit, you should know what I was doing while you were driving here." Gallagher's smirk vanished. "What are you talking about?" Naomi pulled her smartphone from her waterproof jacket pocket. "I am a logistics programmer, Dominic. I build algorithms that route information efficiently. 15 minutes ago, using my satellite hotspot, I uploaded high-resolution scans of the ledger and the contents of Charles Gable's lockbox to a secure cloud server. That server is tied to a dead man's switch on my heartbeat monitor. She tapped the smartwatch strapped to her wrist. If my heart stops, or if I don't enter a cryptographic key every 12 hours, that server automatically emails those documents to the FBI, the SEC, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Gallagher stared at her, the rain running down his face, his composure completely shattered. "You want the gold? Keep it," Naomi said, stepping closer, her eyes blazing with the fury of everything she had lost. "But you work for Richard Gable, so you are going to dial his private number right now, put it on speakerphone, and hand it to me. Because Richard and I are going to have a little chat about the future of my tech company." Reluctantly, with shaking hands, Gallagher pulled a satellite phone from his coat, dialed, and held it out. "What is it, Dominic? Is it done?" Richard Gable's arrogant voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello, Richard," Naomi said. Dead silence on the other end of the line. "I have your grandfather's confession, Richard," Naomi said, her voice ringing out over the thunder. "I have the proof that your entire empire is built on stolen blood money. So here is my counteroffer. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, you are going to resign as CEO of my company. You are going to sign over 100% of the voting shares back to me. You are going to publicly drop the fabricated debt lawsuits. If you do this, you get to keep your freedom, and I will delete the files. If you refuse, I let the timer run out, and you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary." There was a long, agonizing pause. The rain poured down on the quarry, filling the black depths once again. "You little," Richard hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "You don't have the guts." "I bought a flooded death trap with my last $4,000, Richard," Naomi smiled, looking down at the vault. "I have absolutely nothing to lose. You have everything. What's it going to be?" The defeat in Richard's voice was total when he finally whispered, "Send me the transfer paperwork." 3 years later, Oakhaven Quarry was no longer a barren, toxic pit. Naomi Kensington had reclaimed her logistics empire, pushing its valuation past the $1 billion mark. But she never sold the land in Miller's Hollow. Instead, she partnered with Adrian Brody and Henry Callaway to fully drain and excavate the site. They surrendered the stolen gold to the federal government, earning a massive 20% finder's fee, which Naomi used to build a state-of-the-art wildlife preserve and clean water reservoir for the local farming community. Richard Gable quietly vanished from the corporate world, disgraced and terrified of the shadows of his own family's past. Naomi often stood on the ridge where she had once pitched her desperate tent, looking out over the crystal-clear water of the restored lake. She had arrived broken, bankrupt, and searching for an escape. Instead, she had dug deep into the darkness, faced the ghosts of the past, and pulled out a future brighter than she could have ever calculated. From losing her empire to uncovering a century-old syndicate at the bottom of a toxic pit, Naomi's incredible journey proves that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover your true worth. If this story of betrayal, brilliant revenge, and hidden treasure kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable real-life stories. What would you have done with the gold? Comment below.